Peace, everybody. This is Coach Bates, and it's part 4 on the ground locker room. And we're talking about the NCAA's new lawsuit. Alright, now this is a continuation, rather, of the Ed O'Bannon case, which you know they're not going to go down easy. So this is all this is them fighting back against the Ed O'Bannon case. So the Ed O'Bannon case stated that they had to pay student athletes more than their cost of tuition. Alright, they had to pay for the cost of attendance. The actual cost of attending college. So the actual cost of attending college is more than just expenses. It's expenses beyond tuition, room and board, books, fees, everything like that. It's beyond that, okay? They also have to get paid for the total value of the scholarship, right? So what they're being sued for now is they've illegally capped the value of the scholarship. So they're taking out the cost of attendance, which is where the players were making their money. So they were continuing to give players scholarships. Certain schools were doing this. They're continuing to give players scholarships. They're not paying the full cost of attendance, which is where players make their money. Separate from, because they don't make their money with room, board, tuition fees. That goes pretty much back to the school. Okay, they make their money in the back end with the cost of attendance, which will vary from school to school because every school doesn't attract the same crowd. Some schools it can attract 90,000 on a regular basis. Some schools only 50 to 60,000. So there's a difference in what school you go to, how much your cost of attendance will be. But there were schools that were withholding that from students and not paying them. All right, now we talk about this in our book, NCAA Slave, Economic Exploitation of College Athletes. We talk about why you need to understand the scholarship in its entirety so that things like this don't happen to you. All right, now this is only in the major 11 conferences. All right, the Big 12, Pac-12, SEC, Big 10, you know, those power conferences. These are the only student athletes this applies to. Men and women's basketball and football. All right, but it's a really big settlement. This is huge. You're not going to hear about it on ESPN. I didn't see it at all. I'm out of the country right now. I'm in Europe, so I haven't been able to watch ESPN. But I haven't saw too many articles published about it. All right, and this is a $209 million federal class action lawsuit. This is more than the original Ed O'Bannon case, and this is a continuance of it. So, you know, $209 million is a lot to get spread out through the college athletes. And if you're not aware of the case, you're not going to get your paperwork in to get the money. That was the problem with the Ed O'Bannon case. Although Ed O'Bannon and the rest of the athletes that filed with him, although it was, you know, a huge case, you had so many athletes that didn't know the deadline to get their paperwork in and didn't receive a dime because they didn't get their paperwork in. The NCAA moved so fast, as a matter of fact, that they had to push the deadline back a month because you had so many players that were just finding out about the case just weeks prior to the deadline. So they haven't set the deadline for this case yet because it's not finalized, although they have won their initial claim. They still have to go back for a second court date, second hearing. So it's something to stay on top of. It's the settlement over scholarship shortage. All right, that's the legal jargon they use. NCAA settlement over scholarship shortage, which meant that they didn't pay them the entire amount that they are due for their scholarship. They didn't pay them any of their cost of attendance, which is where the Ed O'Bannon case said players can start getting a piece of. And there's a percentage that they use so that every program pays their players accordingly, according to how many, how much their cost of attendance is. So this is something to stay on top of. Like I said, we talked about this in my book, NCAA Slave, Economic Exploitation of College Athletes. So you want to read that book thoroughly, man. It breaks down how to break down a scholarship, how to ask for what you deserve out of your scholarship, and how to know what to sign, what not to sign, you know, so that you get your fair due. And the NCAA has been figuring out plenty of ways to not pay athletes. And whenever athletes do win court cases like this, it's up for the other student athletes to be conscious of what's going on legally with the NCAA and to follow up, because winning these court cases isn't going to help everybody in its entirety unless you file your paperwork. You know, I personally have a friend that played in the Big 12 that got a check through the Ed O'Bannon case, and it was just from, you know, saying We need to fill his paperwork out. Fills the paperwork out, and it was very short, long, like a page long. It wasn't that long at all. So it doesn't take that much time, but you got to go through with it. And although the money given out for the Ed O'Bannon case wasn't life changing, it still was a monumental win, and it still helps. Cases like this case right here for the $209 million. This is more than the Ed O'Bannon case shelled out, and there's plenty of other athletes that are following to follow this case up. So you guys got to really stay on them and make sure they pay out everything that the judges awarded. Otherwise, the judge awards them to pay out $209 million. You only got 30-40% of the people that are owed the money fill out their paperwork, and then NCAA only ends up paying 70 to 80 million, or 40, 50 million, something like that, but just not the full amount that was awarded. And every athlete that's in those major 11 conferences needs to file so that they can get their money. And that's only if you haven't received your cost of attendance, because there may be some athletes that have. Every program isn't the dirtiest, so to speak. But if you don't know what the cost of attendance for your school is at, I suggest getting a lawyer, or finding out, if you trust your own math, you trust your own judgment, just finding out the formula that your school uses. Well, finding out the numbers from your school so you can just plug it into the formula. And if not, just finding a lawyer and having them look at your scholarship paperwork. Fax yourself a copy, or scan a copy of scholarship papers and go through it with a lawyer to see if you have gotten paid your cost of attendance. Because according to the documents and the paperwork, there's more than one school and more than one conference that failed to do so. So it doesn't say what the conferences are. I'm pretty sure once the case is closed, all of that information will come out in the paperwork from the hearing. But until then, you need to know whether you can be a part of the settlement, or whether your school played honest and gave you your entire cost of attendance, your full value of scholarship. Alright, so that's the last video on the topic. Get back to y'all once the court case is settled. Peace.